Hello and welcome back to the Classic Films channel. This is another film that it was really important to me. It was a film that first opened my eyes to the beauty of silent cinema. There was a time when I believed that silent films were old and outdated. The actors tended to ham it up, the camera was very static, and the storylines were a little bit ridiculous. The film that changed that for me is this film, Buster Keaton's The General from 1927. The story is based on William Pittenger's memoir from 1863 titled The Great Locomotive Chase. It's about the Andrews Raid of April 12, 1862, when Union soldiers went behind Confederate lines to Atlanta to steal a locomotive known as the General. Though it created a sensation at the time, the Andrews Raid had no military effect. However, Keaton was a huge fan of trains and certainly a huge fan of this particular memoir and the story, and he thought it was a great subject matter for a film. Now, the who of this film includes the two writers. That included Buster Keaton and his good friend Clyde Bruckman. Clyde Bruckman was actually a sports writer before he entered the movie business. His prime in the 1920s, he was arguably one of the best writers, gagmen or directors in the business. His keen sense of comedy allowed him to easily shift between diverse assignments for Buster Keaton, co-directing The General, but also working for Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, as well as Harold Lloyd, and he did this without missing a beat. The other important creative, obviously, is Buster Keaton. He co-wrote, he directed, he starred in this particular film. Buster Keaton was known as the Great Stoneface, but again, he was much more than that. He was a man who basically kept his composure at the centre of chaos, and that's what's so lovable about him. Other silent actors tended to overact during this particular period to get their point across, but Keaton was someone who remained observant and collected. His best movies have aged better than those of people like Charlie Chaplin, and he seems like a modern visitor to a world of the silent clowns. Keaton once said, "Charlie's tramp was a bum with a bum's philosophy. Lovable as he would steal if he got the chance. My little fellow was a working man, and honest." That describes not just Buster Keaton's characters, but the man himself. Keaton was a man of real character and someone who could be trusted on the cinema screen as much as in life. He was a lifelong friend of people who gave him a start in the movie business, like Fatty Arbuckle, and he stood by them well after they were forgotten by the rest of Hollywood. Now, what's important is that we don't just laugh at Keaton, we actually identify with him. We feel for him, he takes us along in the story, but he also gives us plenty of laughs along the way as well. Keaton was born in 1897 to a vaudevillian family, and he was literally thrown around the stage from a very young age. Keaton learned from that how to not just fall without hurting himself very badly. He also learned, where comedy came from and how to milk the most from any particular situation. As I mentioned, he gained his start in film from Fatty Arbuckle in 1917. He was directing his first short films by 1920. In less than a decade, from 1920 to 1928, he created a body of work that stands beside Chaplin's, some would say above it, and he did it with fewer resources because he was never as popular or as well funded as Charlie. His on-screen inventiveness is highlighted by the way laughs flow naturally from the action that happens on screen. One sequence flows seamlessly into the next, all helping to build and add to the story as much as it creates laughs. It also builds the character as well, underlining the determination of the hero and his unwavering will to succeed. That is beautifully demonstrated in this sequence. Keaton is also a master of storytelling. He seems to understand tragedy and comedy are structured in much the same way. There is this brief pause in the action while the audience waits breathlessly for the outcome. How the tension is resolved will determine whether the audience release is tears or laughter. This sequence is another example of Keaton's comic genius. This film was made in a time before special effects. When stunts were performed, they were actually stunts. What you're seeing on screen is what was really happening in real life, in front of the camera. Now, Keaton was ambitious and fearless. This scene is an excellent illustration of that. If you watch closely, Keaton comes within a whisker of being very seriously injured. In the moment he does realise that, before resuming the action with barely any hesitation. It's brilliant. Now, the film was neither a critical or a box office success on its release. It only developed its reputation at a much later stage during a period of its re-release in the 1950s and into the 1960s, a time when Keaton re-emerged as a comic master. The American Film Institute ranked it as its number 18 on its greatest movies of all time. The film was selected into the National Film Registry in 1989, the first year of inductions, for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Premiere Film magazine voted the film one of the 50 greatest comedies of all time. And on the list of the 1001 films you should see before you die, it's up there as well. It's a wonderful film for all those reasons. It's funny, it's dramatic, Keaton's amazing on screen, and it's a relatively short film, so it won't take a lot of your time, but it's really time well invested to see one of the best comedies ever made, but equally one of the best silent films and one of the best films ever made. Check it out, and as usual, once you've seen the film, leave some comments on the page here to let other people know what you thought of the film. And we'll see you again soon for our next review.